The New Heights of Beverly Hills. This is the story of a man named Jed. He was a simple mountaineer who lived a humble life in the hills, working hard every single day just to keep his family fed and warm. One afternoon, while Jed was out hunting for some food to put on the dinner table, an extraordinary thing happened. He fired his rifle at the ground, but instead of small game, a bubbling crude liquid began to seep up from the earth. That liquid was oil, often called black gold or Texas tea. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, old Jed became a millionaire. His kinfolk and neighbors were amazed and told him that he must move away from their small mountain cabin. They insisted that California was the place he ought to be, specifically the glamorous neighborhood of Beverly Hills. So, the family loaded up their old truck with everything they owned and moved to a land of swimming pools and movie stars. They became known as the Beverly Hillbillies. One bright morning in Beverly Hills, Ellie Mae noticed something unusual and asked her father what kind of sign was standing outside. It was a great big thing, colored in red, white, and blue, and she thought it was real pretty. The sign said, "Welcome, Hero." Jed was puzzled and wondered who had put it up. Ellie Mae told him that it was Mrs. Drysdale. This information made Jed even more confused, so he decided they should go and talk to the person responsible. Jed looked at the sign and remarked that it was a big rascal and quite beautiful, just as his daughter had described. He looked around for the people who had installed it and saw a man named Scott. Jed asked him where the sign came from and why it was there. Scott confirmed that Mrs. Drysdale had ordered it, though he did not know the reason. The family began to speculate. Jed suggested that Mrs. Drysdale must think one of them was a hero. Jethro immediately jumped in and claimed the title for himself. When Jed asked what Jethro had ever done for Mrs. Drysdale, Jethro proudly explained that he had saved her valuable French poodle dog. Granny was skeptical and asked for the details of this rescue. Jethro explained that he was out back that morning and heard a dog whining. He looked through the hedge and saw a man who looked a bit unusual to him. This man was holding Mrs. Drysdale's poodle and was cutting off all its hair. Jethro told the man to let go of the dog, but the man ignored him. Jethro went through the hedge and asked again, but the man just kept cutting. Finally, Jethro grabbed the man and shook the dog loose. Jethro continued his story, saying the man kept yelling for a person named Masser. Jethro, misunderstanding the word, told the man to go back to his sewer and leave the dog alone. The man then slapped Jethro. While it did not hurt, it made Jethro an awful man in that moment of anger. He picked the man up and tossed him into the swimming pool to cool him off. The man scampered out of the water and ran away like a wet jackrabbit. Once the man was running, Mrs. Drysdale took up the chase, yelling the name Henri over and over. Jethro thought the man was the henneriest little fellow he had ever seen. Meanwhile, Mrs. Drysdale was in a state of high distress. She complained that she would never be able to get Henri to make another house call and that she was now blacklisted by every poodle beautician in Beverly Hills. She looked at her poor dog, Claude, who had to wear a raincoat because he was only half clipped. She tried to comfort the dog, calling herself its mother and referring to her husband, Milburn, as the dog's daddy. Milburn Drysdale was losing his patience and asked her to stop calling him that. He called her heartless and unnatural, but she was too focused on her own problems. She was upset because the sign people had not delivered the Welcome Hero banner for the front of their house. Milburn told her not to worry because he had a tremendous hero's welcome waiting at the bank for their nephew, Lance Bradford. Mrs. Drysdale reminded him that Lance was her nephew, not his. Milburn grumbled that he could be a father to a dog, but not an uncle to a hero. He began listing the expenses he was paying for the reception: an electric sign for $1,500, bleachers for $600, a band for $400, plus confetti and streamers. He remarked that even the astronauts did not have a bigger reception. Mrs. Drysdale insisted that Lance deserved it all because he was the pride of the Air Force, known as Jetstream Bradford. Milburn agreed to the cost but asked for one favor in return. He wanted to invite the Clampett family because they were his biggest depositors. Mrs. Drysdale was horrified at the idea, but Milburn stood his ground. She predicted that everything would change once Lance took over the bank. Milburn clarified that he was making Lance a vice president, but not giving him the bank. Mrs. Drysdale believed it was only a matter of time because Lance was brilliant, daring, and possessed a personality that would bring in staggering accounts. Just then, a secretary interrupted to say that the hero's plane had landed and he was on his way. Mrs. Drysdale was thrilled and told Claude the dog that they must be ready. She ordered Milburn to get into his uniform. Milburn was reluctant, calling the outfit ridiculous, but Mrs. Drysdale insisted it was patriotic. She told him he should feel honored that she chose him to portray Uncle Sam. She eventually forced him out of the office. Milburn then called Jed Clampett and invited him and his family to the bank for the big hero's reception. Jed was delighted and told Granny and Jethro the news. They all believed the party was for Jethro because of the poodle rescue. At the bank, Milburn was struggling with his Uncle Sam costume. He asked his assistant not to make him go through with it, but the assistant told him he looked great and even promised he could keep the fake beard as a bonus. As the hero arrived, the band began to play and the crowd cheered. Lieutenant Lance Bradford appeared, and the man dressed as Uncle Sam saluted him for his valorous service. Milburn, acting as the president of the bank, welcomed Lance. Lance addressed the crowd, saying he joined them not as a hero, but as a fellow employee. He told them he was no longer Jetstream Bradford, the terror of the skies, but simply Vice President Bradford. He told the employees not to look up to him as a hero, but as the nephew of the boss. However, the celebration took a sudden turn when Lance accidentally tripped and fell, hitting his head. Jed and the family were concerned. Jed suggested a doctor should look at him. Jethro felt bad, thinking the party had been for him and his brave act of saving the dog. Milburn was in despair, calling the event an unqualified fiasco. As Lance began to wake up, he was confused and asked who everyone was. Milburn tried to get the Clampett family to leave before his wife regained consciousness, as she had fainted when Lance fell. Before they left, Ellie Mae introduced herself to Lance. Lance, still a bit dazed, told her to call him Jetstream. He showed off his quick reflexes, though he was clearly still unsteady. Once the family left, Milburn received more bad news. While everyone was outside for the reception, someone had robbed the bank. He was frustrated because his security guards were busy carrying balloons instead of guns. Back at the mansion, Milburn tried to explain the situation to the police on the telephone. Mrs. Drysdale interrupted him, demanding that Jethro be arrested for kidnapping their dog. She claimed Jethro was dragging Claude out of the bank while the family waited in a getaway truck. Milburn told her to stop worrying about the dog because the bank had been robbed. Mrs. Drysdale accused Milburn of having no perspective and praised Lance for being the only one who could restore order. Lance arrived and criticized the way the bank was being run, calling it sloppy. He told Milburn that in the Air Force, such a mistake would lead to a court-martial. Lance expressed his disappointment and said he needed to take the company plane up for a spin to unwind. When he found out the bank did not own a plane, he was shocked. Mrs. Drysdale was embarrassed and agreed that an executive jet would give the bank some class. Lance suggested he could find a nice jet for $500,000. Milburn suggested a much cheaper idea. Lance could simply take the dog for a walk. Later that day, Lance went over to the Clampett house to invite Ellie Mae to the homecoming party his aunt was throwing. He met Jed and Granny. Jethro was impressed by Lance's reputation as an ace pilot and asked about his dogfights. Lance tried to sound brave, but the conversation became a series of misunderstandings. Granny offered to mix up some medicine for Lance, thinking he was still unwell from his fall. Lance spent some time with Ellie Mae by the swimming pool. He told her stories of flying through terrifying storms at 20,000 feet, admitting he only made it through because the stewardess gave him a sedative. Mrs. Drysdale arrived and was furious to see Lance with Ellie Mae. She accused the family of trying to trap her nephew. She called Ellie Mae a vixen and a peasant. Jed tried to defend his daughter, but the tension grew. Mrs. Drysdale was determined to keep her hero nephew away from the mountaineers. Despite the chaos and the insults, the day ended with the families still standing together. They remained a group of people who valued their bonds more than any amount of money or any grand title. In the world of Beverly Hills, where signs and symbols often meant more than reality, the Clampett family stayed true to who they were, finding humor and heart in every strange situation they encountered.